Thank you for coming. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Toolkit of Care. I won't take you too much time, I think. The Toolkit of Care is a European project that is supported by COST, which is a European cooperation in science and technology, which is a funding set up to help increase research networks across Europe and beyond. The Toolkit of Care was something that came out of the COVID pandemic crisis in relation to how the electronic arts dealt with that, but also the precarity that many artists and arts organizations found themselves in the post-pandemic situation, which starts to feel slightly far away now, a few years on. But that was where the original project came from. And I will just quickly introduce you to my colleague.
Hi everybody, Alessandro Ludovico. Thanks for passing me the mic. Should I introduce myself very quickly? Yes. I'm Alessandro Ludovico. I'm the editor of Neuro magazine, New Media Art magazine, printed since 32 years, and I'm associate professor at the Winchester School of Art in UK. And in the Toolkit for Care project, I'm responsible for the archiving and publishing group.
Wonderful. And I'll introduce myself also. My name is Jenny Pickett, and I work at APO 33 in Nantes, which was doing the radio workshops downstairs. As well as that, I am the vice chair of the Toolkit of Care project, so that's a little bit of my responsibility. And so we're going to tell you what it's about. So what is it about care? Isn't it just about affection? The different actualizations of care, there is ethical, social, political, and cultural implications. All we do to maintain, sustain, and repair our world. Care also concerns our bodies, ourselves, our environment, and all those things that interweave to form all of the above in various ways and complex ways. Aesthetics of what? Aesthetics of care. So, indeed, aesthetics of care is a process, ethically responsible actions, informed, activated by sensory experience, entailing a caring for ourselves, for others, and for the planet. The aesthetics of care is shaped by an aesthetic understanding of artistic practices and crafts and creativity. So, for instance, an aesthetics of care might be something that we think about as something that's not necessarily focused on a beautiful outcome or something very formal, but rather the interrelationships between people and their environment and everything around them, and more than human others as well. One of the things I think we come to understand from an aesthetics of care is this idea of to sort of go beyond the myth of individuality and think much more collectively. And when we talk about that collectivity, we talk about not just our communities, but thinking about our communities as our people, societies, but thinking about the plants, the animals, the different environments also, the buildings, the maintenance, everything that can form something that is a collective togetherness. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, can you return for a second to the previous slide? Yeah, the previous one? No, the next? Yes. No, then the next one. Sorry. Okay, the next one. Yes, this one. Yeah, it's important because this formulation of an aesthetic of care, it's a process for us. And in this word, the process, lies a lot of meaning, because it's something that it's enacted, enabled. And it implies ethically responsible actions, it implies informed, that they are informed, activated by sensory experience. Again, it's for ourselves, for others, for the planet. And of course, it's shaped by aesthetic understandings, by artistic practice, by creativity. I think that our formulation of aesthetics of care, it's literally a challenge to transform or better create a way to use the aesthetics in order of caring for the others. Can we see the next one? Yes. And of course, there are many different vectors of care. How to activate this process through vectors. About whom? About me, about us, and everything around and in us. So some of them are, of course, the self-care. So to actualize potentials and express identity constructions and narratives of protest, oppression, and opposition. This is self-care, but also care for the human other. So serve in our processes to unify identity or identify, I guess, is there, or diversify communities and the ways in which they might signal and communicate common ideas, desires, wants, and aspirations. And not only for me, so self-care and for the human other, but also for the more than human other. So posthumanism, non-cognitive assemblage, cybernetic culture, and culture is, of course, the vehicle through which these vectors are activated. So the care for culture, producing, presenting, disseminating, publishing, archiving, restoring, rescuing, and studying culture. When we'll be finished, I'll talk more extensively, especially about archiving and publishing strategies for care. And of course, care for the planet. So everything around us, dark ecologies, sustainability, but also politics of and as care. So policies, regulations, infrastructures, a new socialist thinking, social democracy, social crisis. These, it seems like a lot, but each of these single vectors are somehow inspiring, directing, activating our practices. So, vectors of care in art practices, again, for the self, the human other, the modern human other, and the world. Related to art and cultures, let's see the sub-disciplines of care. So, one should consider, therefore, questions such as art therapy, healthcare for artists. This is something that is usually really not debated. We feel the holy fire to produce, but what about healthcare for artists? Healthcare as art.
Because usually when we talk about health and art, we think about artists providing some kind of relief or therapy for people who need, who have other needs. And oftentimes the artists in this process are forgotten. Their health, their mental health, and which can often be the result of social situations and precarious situations that artists often find themselves in, because it's not always the route to riches in our society. But yes, also care for the disabled, accessibility, interfaces for disabled, social accessibility. So that's another very important thing, which also affects artists. As well as others. Family care, parenthood and art, etc. How do mothers travel? How do mothers get seen in the art world, for example? Often it's not a question for fathers that they might not travel or they might not go somewhere. However, this is a question that comes up often if you're female, as your ability to continue to do art. This is something that still goes on today. It's getting better, but it's very far from being perfect. Care and radical politics, utopias, socialism, and curatorial practices as care. So this is like, how do we think about curation in terms of inclusivity, in terms of diversity, in terms of including everybody, and care for the space, the communities, those that come, everything, I guess. And so do it with others. DIY practices is something that in the process of the Toolkit of Care is one of the areas that is quite strong, because it's all often about learning together, doing stuff together, not taking a position of hierarchy in a creative process, and trying to transmit and make and discover without a sort of formal teaching, I guess, and that goes quite a long way towards this aesthetics of care. Education and workshopping kind of follows the same line. Accessibility again, feminist affairs, young and emerging artists. How do we bring all of those people into the Toolkit of Care? Art beyond commodity. So how do we think about art as something to be lived and experienced as opposed to bought and sold? And then we come back to the origins with the pandemic crisis aesthetic, which is another way that we connect across cultures, across distances. And finally, data care. Who cares for our hypercells? So this is something that's been there's been quite a few events around this particular aspect, especially in relation to social media, black boxes, and AI, etc. How do we care for this?
Yeah, of course, ethics is very important in this whole process. And the ethics of care requires some crucial characteristics: attention, affection, recognition, respect, but also commitment and trust and honesty. And each of these can be present or absent in an art practice. And it's important to evaluate then the art practice we do, but also the ones that we enable, that we curate. That's why I'm connecting, for example, to the crucial curation of care, because there is responsibility there, and we should evaluate these characteristics when we act to produce or to enable art. And eventually implement a toolkit of care. I don't know if this is the last one or maybe one of the last. Anyway.
We're near, yes.
Yeah. What's love got to do with it? Quoting a quite famous Tina Turner, if I'm not mistaken, song. So, the Toolkit of Care should express somehow care for young artists and researchers. This is embedded in the whole program. In the program there is sorry, specific support for young artists, especially. There is support for off-centers. We focus mainly on weak countries, non-urban territories, non-major art centers, and the global south. Care, of course, for the not privileged other, females, queer, non-binary, non-Western. I think this is becoming more and more relevant in the current political scenario, sadly. Care for thinkers and thinkers. So experimental arts, crafts, again, do it yourself, do it with others, speculative practices, critical design, media archaeology as well. Very important, I'm particularly close to that. Calls for media archives. Care for media archives. so please.
This is obviously you're going to talk maybe a bit more about this afterwards, but something that can be often overlooked is how we care for the documentation and the production that many of our projects, especially those that are working in electronic arts and across media, have, with the advancement of media and technologies all the time, creating a certain obsolescence sometimes that makes it difficult to maintain and care and keep and continue to look after servers, all sorts of things.
Let me mention just one thing. I was almost by accident involved in a meeting just before Transmediale. A meeting I was possibly the only person who was not running a festival in this meeting. And one of the main concerns that was debated was, okay, we run a festival, which is a very involving event for whatever, 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 days. And there's a lot of people involved, usually hundreds, if not thousands. But after the festival ends, what remains beyond the personal memories, beyond the contacts, the chats that we had, and the recordings? How can we somehow archive the experience of the festival that can be useful then for those who were not able to be present there? And I mean, luckily this meeting generated a deeper concern, and we have started a debate about it. And this is basically what the Care for Media Archives is. It's great that we have plenty of videos, archiving of other types of media, but we should care also about having the modern personnel, the organization websites to be up and running even after 10, 15, 20 years, and to be accessible and to be indexed in order to find what we are interested to there, not relying on the major technological companies. And this is an effort for media archives. Sorry, I really needed to point that. And of course, care for the future of the toolkit of care. So, I don't know what's next. Yeah. The structure of the project is based on 4 working groups. The first one is about sharing care. The second one is care in visual and performing arts. It's more specific. There is a more theoretical group that cares, it's about the analysis, so theory and politics of care.
Which is a major subject, I think, across a lot of universities right now as well, in infiltrating many different domains. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fourth about publishing and archiving, but we already mentioned it. So, stronger still, art practices might not just follow an ethics of care, but actually model it. That's again about not just having debates, but trying to devise strategies that can be actionable. So, a few stories of care. Yeah, there are 2 more slides, I think, they are remarking this. So the practice of making arts needs to consider an ethics of care, as we have said before, and vectors of care in art practices. Yeah, I think I would might just briefly introduce the toolkit.
We have also the website, yeah?
Yeah. Oh yes, the website, of course.
So in Stories of Care, there's I think, if you go to the very top, and there's a tab, yeah. And so here, there's an archive of a lot of the different actions that have taken place so far that you can browse at your own interest. Which includes as artist residencies, conferences, training schools, meetings, festivals, all sorts of things.
Yeah, and of course, we care, pun not intended, or better intended, about the website. But as a final outcome of the project, which ends end of 2026, basically next year, we are going to produce a physical toolkit of care. A physical toolkit of care, which is still an open process, so we are still discussing how to make it, how to include it, but maybe I can spoil something about it, at least some general ideas. Again, the challenge is how to produce something that is not just a pure classic form of documentation, but producing something that can be used actively, or at least something hybrid in between these two things. So both documenting what we have done, but also giving the possibility to enable processes. So at the moment, the general idea is that we would like to produce a box, cartoon box, somehow in the tradition of the Fluxus art movement, where they were producing boxes with many objects inside. Some of them that would be used to even to play. In this box, of course, there will be some publications for sure. There will be for sure printed documentation about all the 4 different groups, which it's essential even also to give, I mean, a tangible medium to document what has been done. There should be some proceedings. We are still seeing which ones and how many we can produce from the different conferences, and this is, let's say, the most theoretical part. Possibly there should also be a deck of cards.
There will be a deck
yes.
of cards.
I'm mentioning everything as a possibility in terms that, you know, I mean, as you know, I'm one of the biggest fans of the deck of cards. Deck of cards, there is a special deck of cards for, let's say, I mean, it's not even a game in my opinion, but it's a playful way to conduct a dialogue. It's a deck of cards that facilitates a dialogue we have through a specific strategy. It's a dialogue that is meant to produce speculative thinking. It's called Atlas of Weak Signals. And I have to say that we have tested so far as I know, 4 times publicly, maybe more.
Yeah, I've also tested it in France. So.
Yeah, so 5 probably. I mean, a number of times. And to our delight, all the time we have tested, because this dialogue happens in 1 hour. The people involved, which is a restricted amount of people, were very involved. I noticed something that I was particularly proud of. That was that during this 1 hour, literally none of the participants felt the urge to check the phone, not the smartphone, not even to check what time was in the end. So I think that that's the highest level of engagement we could aspire for. So probably the dynamic was very nice somehow. So we will print this deck of cards and include them, of course, with instructions so that anybody can actually enable it.
But the other thing about the deck of cards is it does produce talking points between groups, and small groups and then bigger groups come back together, and it enables a sort of free discussion that brings quite surprising thinking and results and different ways to see the world or to understand the different connections between the interconnectedness of everything. And I think that's one of the very strong points of the card.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, in a way, the way it works embeds quite a lot of the characteristics that we wanted to enable in the whole project. So we hope that the approach and the efforts that have been made could resonate through the documentation, but also again be activated through other elements. There are still possible theoretical components that we're still discussing to include in the box. Of course, when it will be official, everybody will know. Honestly, let me share something that came out from discussing the toolkit with Chiara over these days, because of course we want all of them to be as accessible as possible, but of course there will be a very limited amount of physical toolkit of care produced. So the idea is of course to have as much as possible to be shared online. And through the chat I had with Chiara over these days, she was suggesting that we make let's say, a do-it-yourself version of the physical toolkit, including the box. So to say that there will be, let's say, a possible printout of the box that you can print out on cardboard and then fold it, and of course files for all the publications that you can print out and include them, files for the deck of cards and instructions and whatever else we can include, so that theoretically you can rebuild the kit yourself. I think it's also embodying the same spirit that we somehow want to foster through the toolkit. But again, this is still in open debate among us to then finalize next year.
Excellent. Great idea.
Okay, I think that's it for the presentation of the Toolkit of Care project.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
Yes, actually I have just one quick comment, and maybe I missed the introduction, so maybe it was discussed before, but there was a book which was published a few months ago, and you might have heard about it. It's called Pirate Care, and it's written by Marcel Mars, Valeria Graziano, and Tomislav Medak. And let's say the angle of this book is to say like care is a practice that is criminalized in Europe, but not only in Europe, in the US and at the borders and in a lot of different contexts. So I want to understand also in this project, like, do you have also this influence, or do you have this approach also to try to circumvent this active process of criminalization of care?
I don't know if we have something that's active about the criminalization of care, because this toolkit is very much about the art networks and the electronic art networks specifically. But I think pirate care is involved in the toolkit of care.
Okay, let's say it's a small word in general, because some of the people in Toolkit of Care are involved in one of the organizations, Pirate of Care, involved in one of the organizations in Croatia. I wanted to say that Pirate of Care is now officially out as a book. Spoiler, we're even going to review it in one of the next issues. But it was already, as you know better than me, available as a PDF since a few years. And it was one of the inspiring literature before, when we were debating the whole project, so before we even started. So these practices and the spirit of them are really permeating what we're doing, and they will surely be identifiable, including probably the Pirate of Care specific publication through one of the documentation, yes. Yeah. I mean, there is not only Pirate of Care, actually. You know, there is this theory now that, theory that has been quite proven, that when you learn, when you start to focus on something, on some subject, then you start noticing things related to the subject all of a sudden. Especially for our attention economy on screens. And you think, oh, how are all these things popping up now? But actually it's you paying specific attention to something that you would have ignored before. It really happened to me personally. I started to notice every book that had care in the title, and I've noticed that has been produced quite a bit lately. So one of the things that we're discussing, it's also a bibliography of art and care. And of course, Pirate Care is one of the principal books. I have also a specific idea about how to activate this bibliography that is connected to what I'm going to talk about in a bit. But I think that in general, it's important that we not only define by what we produce, but one of the points was what others are doing. So somehow referencing others' work in this respect. And I think that, I mean, the last 2 or 3 years there has been quite a production of reflections, especially about aesthetic practices and care, how to embed them, how to activate them. So it will be definitely reflected in the remaining events, but especially in the toolkit in a way or another. Yeah, one thing would be, yeah, I'm just building up on this, would be to make even just, include in the toolkit, even just, I don't know, a flyer or a very tiny zine with all the bibliography that we'll be able to assemble.
Yeah. But I don't know if you were, I'm not sure if you were, where you came into the talk, but there is quite a few different vectors of care in this project, which is not specifically focused on healthcare as a thing, but much more broad than that.
Yes.
Thank you for the talk, and I really appreciate your presentation, and I think like I can navigate your website and know more of different projects. And I have a question that is, do you have experiences in terms of working with institutions, and like that it's like including care, which I mean is care involves with like investment of time and resources. And so I see that you're also like sponsored, but are like the capability of care being limited due to like the EU fundings of like culture or like the current political circumstances, and also because like me personally, last year I have a project in museum which is related to care, but I think like when I practiced the project, most of the time when the museum sometimes doesn't get the concept, artists become one of the facilitators that often have to communicate with the museum and almost become a role as an activist. So I'm wondering like if there's like projects that have like experiences regarding to facing a bigger environment, including like institution or political environment.
So if I understand your question, you're talking about from the perspective of how the institution cares for the others inside the institution, or the subject of care as an artist. It's a good question.
Yeah. I'm not completely sure we have big institutions literally involved. I mean, probably on a personal level, but I think that also programmatically, this project comes from a series of quite a number of people who comes from small institutions or independent art spaces. And the intention was, I mean, among the intentions there was the one of literally join and activate process together, not necessarily all the process all together, which is very difficult with big institutions. So when it comes to, I'd say, the big ones, it's, I mean, my humble experience is that on one side I try to avoid to deal with big institutions unless there is you have such a, let's say, a big footprint of what you are doing that you have that you can negotiate it in an easier way, because otherwise, and this is just a question of scale. Because the bigger it is, the most heavy, let's say, they are in the process, and the most somehow, how can I say, literally, I mean, they have to follow very precise schemes all the time. It's like an industry. When you go to the very big museums. The only way to find space there is to find, let's say, a smaller part of them that can be more independent. There are cases like that, but generally speaking, I would even provocatively ask, do we really need the big institutions for these specific processes? I think that historically, the big institutions have started to take care of independent processes after many years. Somehow their role is to archiving them, to institutionalize them in the end. But that happens when the most exciting part is already over somehow. And I might be naive, but I think for this process we are still in the most exciting part. So I would not aim to find whatever relationship with the big institutions, but rather to expand, to have a smaller scale upgrade or not to other independent institutions. Let me just finish with one thing. I'm quite obsessed by the concept of networks. And I mean, the big institutions are kind of the, I don't know, the big technology, if you compare to the big technological corporations when we compare it to culture. I'm way more interested in the network of small institutions and spaces that can form, like we have done over the last few years, and can relate to other networks of small institutions and spaces. And basically what we're trying to do here as well is exactly the same. So to open a dialogue and understand what is going on and try to see how many bridges we can build. Cultural bridges, of course. But it's not to form, let's say, the largest possible network of institutions. That won't work. It's to relate, so form, let's say, small clusters that can relate to each other. Then I think you can build something that is way more relevant of what a big institution can actually do. I don't know if I answered your question, but...
I might add to that, yes. I might add to that, so I mean, it depends on how we see a big institution. If we see like just huge museums as a big institution, or universities such as Weimar as a big institution. But I think our experience so far working with those institutions has been really through people. And so it's the individual people that are connected to those spaces that bring those places to encourage them to participate and join in and host and be part of the Toolkit of Care. And that includes all the people that then get involved on every level. So from those that are the students that come to help to other professors or whatever who discover by the fact that we're doing those actions. But it has been really much more something that's been on person to person as opposed to person to faceless institution.
Of course, of course. Thank you very much. I need just thanks a lot, Jen. I need literally less than 5 minutes to put the computer and connect it to the beamer, so don't go away.
Yeah, thank you. 那大家还可以再跟他们交流，他们都会在现场。那我们就准备进行下一场。